Mr. Wuffles by David Wiesner. So do you remember last week when I taught you how to read images? Well, we're gonna get some practice today. David Wiesner is known for wordless or near wordless books, and so far it's working pretty well for him. The Caldecott Award, in case you haven't heard of it, is the most prestigious award given to picture books in America. Wiesner has won the Caldecott 3 times, and he's had 3 additional books placed as runners-up. Mr. Wuffles happens to be a runner-up, but don't let that sway you. This is probably my favorite Wiesner book, because as my boyfriend would put it, this book is comedy gold. Wiesner is well known for hyper-detailed and usually brightly colored illustration, and typically he weaves the entire narrative of one of his books with few, if any, words at all. This particular book has a lot of words in it, actually, although the majority of them are rather hard to translate. He tells this particular story in the style of a comic book, utilizing clearly defined panels and word bubbles. So, in either a wordless or a nonsense language book, which in some ways this book reads as both, and you'll see why in a minute, we have to use what's called pure inference. We need to read the full contents of each picture to understand the emotional, cognitive, and narrative directions of this story. So we could infer from the cover and the first couple of pages that this book is in fact a book about a cat named Mr. Wuffles. The back inside jacket even has a wonderful picture of the artist and model. But once you get a couple of pages into it, you realize that this book is not, in fact, about a cat, insomuch as it's about a campaign to get around a cat. So yeah, this book is actually a book about aliens, in a very real sense being held hostage by a cat. But then come to find out it's not just a book about aliens, it's also a book about coalition, cooperation, shared food and shared goals, and the importance of a solid plan clearly communicated when successful feline evasion is on the line. There is success, and there are some goodbyes, and one incredibly pissed off cat. Because they had such a good time last time, why not do it again? So yes, this book is about a cat, but it's about aliens, but it's about plans, but it's about coalition, but it's about success, but it's about doing it all over again. This book, in short, is about misdirection and redirection. And sometimes you just need a good Mr. Wuffles MacGuffin. That's a Hitchcockian term, which means the thing that you think is the thing but really isn't the thing, but we're going to focus on the thing because we think that's a thing. That is a highly technical definition, and it is 1,000% correct. Or is it? I mean, honestly, the book is misdirection. Who's to say what it is about? After all, the picture is always bigger. Who knows? This week, I'm profiling author-illustrator Flavia Z. Drago. Drago hails from Mexico City. She began her career as a graphic designer and worked a lot on packaging and products. But later, she intentionally evolved her career more toward illustration for advertising and for books. She studied for certificates in illustration in both Barcelona and Paris, and eventually she completed a master's in illustration at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, England. While as an author-illustrator, she only has 2 regular storybooks as well as 2 board books published here in the US and beyond. She has also extensively illustrated books by other authors in Latin America and Spain, and I would love to get my hands on some of those other books. She's only been publishing her solo books in the last 2 years, and normally I'm profiling people who have been publishing their own books for longer. But I believe that Drago is such a talent that I wanted to show you her work today, and I scheduled this video long before I heard about a couple of incredible developments that have happened in recent months. I'm going to share those a little later in this video. Drago loves the creepy and the spooky, but she translates it in such a unique way. She delivers the monstrous to us with whimsy and delight rather than terror, all the while speaking a visual language rooted in Mexican folk painting and illustration. So we're going to look at her 2 regular-sized picture books today. They are both available in English and Latin American Spanish editions. My dream and hope is that someday they will create bilingual editions of all of her books in Spanish and English. Her first book is called Gustavo the Shy Ghost. Now, back at Chaucer's Books in Santa Barbara, where I worked in the children's department, my colleagues and I were obsessive Gustavo fans. We found a Gustavo poster that somehow we had missed in our files and immediately put it up on the wall. This little dude is up year-round. Some people are very quick to label this a Dia de los Muertos book. That is the Day of the Dead, celebrated in Mexico and the diaspora on the 1st and 2nd of November. And I do think that Gustavo is an excellent read for Dia de Muertos, but I don't think that he has to be confined to a holiday. I think Gustavo is good for every day. I remember being immediately captured the first time I saw this book. This is a rare use of super bright colors all over the place. I had to pull it off the shelf. I love how it looks like papel picado, a traditional kind of Mexican cut paper decoration. Gustavo has an awesome family who love him so much, so at home, he's totally fine. And he has this girl he really likes, Alma. But the problem is, when it comes to being with all the other monsters, he's really shy. He keeps trying to find a way to get close to everybody. He tries all sorts of different things. And they just don't see him, even when he's right in the middle of the room. Poor dude! He doesn't quite know what to do. So he decides, I love to play the violin. I'll invite everybody to come to a violin concert on Dia de Muertos. Okay, I have to take a time out here because his concert attire kills me. How cute is the little ghost bow tie? He's there at the right time, but when he gets there, not a soul had come to his concert. So he decides to cheer himself up and do what he loves the most. Plays his violin so beautifully that he just starts glowing. And guess who shows up? And then everybody shows up because apparently monsters are just not really good with time. So Gustavo makes all sorts of friends and suddenly he's in the center of things with everybody else. And protecting them, being creative with them. And his friends, it says, never stopped loving him. So you see this little girl right here? This cute little witch? Guess what? Just this summer, Drago published the follow-up, Leila, the Perfect Witch. Leila Wayward was always a really fantastic witch. Every witchy thing that she was supposed to do, she was great at. She never had a problem doing anything. She was always impressive. But even though she has won all sorts of awards for all sorts of activities, what she really wants to win is the magnificent witchy cake-off. She came from a long line of women that were experts in the dark arts of patisserie, and so she assumed that she was just going to be great at this too. But strangely enough, for the first time in her life, she's not the best at it. She's not good at it at all. She blows off all sorts of other activities and social time just so she can keep perfecting her art. And yet still, disaster! But her sisters, who were awesome, step in and help her learn how to bake. So she goes to the cake-off and she makes the recipe, and if I may say so, that is a super cute cake. But Faustus Gray wins instead. But everybody's proud of her and she says, you know, I don't think losing is as bad as I thought it might be. And it turned out that the thing the Wayward family was the best at was eating cake together. My family's also pretty good at that. Beyond the illustration of these books, which appeals to me emotionally and stylistically on a very deep level, I also believe that the themes of these books are not just themes that children wrestle with. I still talk to all sorts of adults all the time about various forms of shyness, about varying degrees of social isolation, and a profound longing for a place in a loving, caring, enveloping community. And I certainly hear from a lot of fellow adults about feeling like I'm not enough. About I know this particular area and I know how to succeed in this area, but I just don't know how to do it in this other area that really matters to me. I don't care what it is. If there is something that's important to us, be it a hobby, a relationship, a skill, if we don't feel that we are good at it or can get good at it, that is not a fun place to be. I think that these books succinctly articulate universal challenges that come with being human. Leila and Gustavo are both stymied by problematic obstacles, but they find their way to new growth through their own personal courage and the encouraging power of their families and friends. Stories like these remind us that we do need to take responsibility, we need to take up our own action in order to change ourselves. And we also need the support of a loving community to make that change stick. Seriously, I could not love these books more. Drago is, in my opinion, an illustration genius with a very clear and distinct voice. And she's having quite a moment right now. 2 major companies have just released products that either she designed or that are meant to go along with her existing work. And I get to share both with you. First up, go to your local Target right now. Target does a little Dia de Muertos line every year now. And this year, they had her design all of it. I'm estimating that there's about 25 pieces in the collection. And yes, I hunted through several Targets in order to find the pieces that I found, so you may not find them all at the same one. My buddies and I are still looking for the wooden ofrenda playset because it's magical. Just look at this beautiful tray. Oh my gosh. Whichever of these pieces you can find, I think you're going to be thrilled. They're all just beautiful. And now I have to give a minor disclaimer. Anybody who knows me in real life knows that I am an indie bookstore girl, and a die-hard one. I do not spend much time or money in chain bookstores. However, I do have to give it to Barnes & Noble that every once in a while, there is something exclusive that they land that I have to have. And I think this one is going to be incredibly self-explanatory. Yes, they made a Gustavo plush, and I'm so happy. Yeah, it's kind of a puppet, although I have to admit it's almost like an oven mitt puppet, but I don't even care because it's the perfect puppet. And now I can snuggle Gustavo whenever I damn well please. Seriously, I just found out this thing existed yesterday, and I went straight out and got one. You will not be disappointed. Flavia Z, Drago, you're a big hero of mine. You bring tradition and innovation, color and emotion to your work. It is work that clearly comes from your heart, and you express it with refined skill. Felicidades for all your new and growing success. I cannot wait for more. I hope your picture only gets bigger. It's Theory Wednesday again here at The Big Picture, and today I'm going to answer the question, why do we read stories anyway? I have a feeling I'm going to need to answer this question in different ways across time. We could simply say that we read stories because we like to do it, we enjoy it. But why do we enjoy it? What is the function of it that makes it so enjoyable? When I speak about that, I tend to go back to this amazing book written by David Mamet called 3 Uses of the Knife. David Mamet, in case you are unfamiliar with him, is a very important playwright in American theater, has dominated many conversations for decades, and unfortunately in the last 1 or 2 decades has kind of lost it. I mean, his politics are yikes. So don't Google him and come at me about that part, that's not what we're talking about. Before he was yikes, Mamet had some incredible ideas, and even though drama and literature are not exactly the same, he speaks to the idea of narrative, and in the beginning it talks about humanity's need to dramatize. His first point is that we do this individually and communally all the time. We can't seem to let the individual events of our lives stand as individual events. We have to string them into a narrative. It can't be as simple as, I got up, that was a thing. I had a piece of toast, that was a thing. I watched TV for a minute, that's a third thing. We have to string it into, I got up and I thought, yes, I'd like a piece of toast, and then I watched some TV while I had my toast. Now, that is not the only thing we do. Mamet then points out that part of dramatization is emphasis and exaggeration. So it might be, oh my gosh, I woke up so early because I was so hungry. We didn't eat late enough last night. And so I got up and I burned all the toast, but I ate it anyway. And then I watched TV. I don't know how much TV I watched. It was probably 3 hours. And then I finally got to work almost on time. In reality, we could have watched TV for a lot longer or a lot shorter, but it really has to do with us making sense of the time. It has to do with us making sense of events. Oh, I woke up early because this. I didn't just randomly wake up early. Humanity is always making reasons for things. I'm not trying to say there are not reasons for things. I'm saying humanity has to construct internal and often externalized stories for this is the sequence of events, this is why it happened, and these are the ways in which it really impacted me. Here are the beats of the story. We do it with our personal lives in order to give our lives meaning, to ascribe meaning to ourselves, or to bring out meaning we believe already exists in our lives. However, we also look for narratives that other people have constructed as places where we find mirrors, understanding, challenges, comforts. We use narratives external to ourselves, sometimes to understand ourselves better, sometimes to understand others in our lives better, our world in general. We often do it in order to allow ourselves to decompress. And the decompression that happens through humor is different than the decompression that happens through drama. Mamet would argue we actually need both. He argued that the TV schedule that we had traditionally for many decades, where comedy happened earlier in the night and then it gave way to drama later in the evening, had to do with humanity letting go through the catharsis of laughter and then giving into some more processing and deeper levels later at night. Somehow Mamet's thing does not take all the late night comics into account. Whatever, we'll give him some leeway on the finer points of that particular set of ideas. All of that to say, I like Mamet's arguments about how humanity has to dramatize things for itself, how it has to make things into a narrative, has to make things into an interesting narrative. So if we take Mamet's sentiments to heart, and I personally do, then yes, we tell our own story and we take in stories from other people as a way to make sense of the world, as a way to enjoy the world, reimagine it, do all sorts of things. It is the way that we open up the world. Without story, we have very little way of actually communicating much to anyone. Not all communication is story, but without story, the communication often lacks context. I once had an incredible literature professor for 1 semester, the great Sam Alvord, who expressed something like this in a class. If I hand you a list of premises, you can accept or reject that list of premises, perhaps you can memorize them. It isn't something that will necessarily make you engage the material. If I give you a story, I give you something that is easier to enter, perhaps through identification with a character or a moment in that story. It is a more open form of communication than simply giving a list of information. The source of the story is not nearly as important as the meaning of that story for you. And part of the mission of this channel is to try to open that up for you, that perhaps there are avenues of meaning that you haven't found yet, that maybe you have been dismissing some simpler forms of meaning. So that is my first answer. Human beings need stories to make sense of their lives. We need to tell them and we need to take them in. And the beauty of that model is, while we theoretically could tell the same story our whole lives, we also get a chance to tell a different story, and another different story, and another different story. Our stories are malleable. The story of the world is malleable. It gives much more possibility for change in ourselves and change in our world. That is one of the reasons that stories matter. And I'm sure we'll talk about several other thinkers and what they think about story too. Just give me time, we'll get around to it. Remember, the picture is always bigger. Margaret's Unicorn by Briony May Smith. As you very well may have noticed by now, I am a big fan of mythological creatures. He really wanted in on this one today, for obvious reasons. He's like, look, Ma, you even matched the unicorn. Fine, you had your time. I snagged this book a couple of years back off a display at an excellent store in Menlo Park, California called Kepler's Books. It was an employee recommendation and they were absolutely correct. And what I loved about it is that it's a slightly more realistic unicorn story. So there's a ton of unicorn books being published, and as a clear fan of mythological and magical creatures, I'm here for it. But at the same time, most of the unicorn books being published are pink princessy picture books, usually without a hint of irony, and I am just over it. So seeing a baby unicorn like this one who is so cute but with a gray dappled coat, somewhat suggestive of a real-life baby horse, well, that caught my attention immediately. Briony May Smith happens to be a British author-illustrator, and side note, as I was researching her for this video, I was very excited to see that she is the illustrator for the companion picture book to an animated short made by Aardman, who do Wallace and Gromit and Shaun the Sheep, called Robin Robin. It's about a robin who is rescued and raised by a family of mice. It's on Netflix. Go watch it right now, and I'm going to track down that book because she did such a wonderful job. Not that I'm surprised after reading this book. She does a really, really great job tapping into the tradition and the landscape of the northern part of the island of Britain. Scotland is never named in this book, however, Thistle and Heather are, which are both synonymous with Scotland, and the landscape depicted looks a lot like the Scottish Highlands, which are in fact mountains that lead eventually all the way to the coast. This is also significant because, in case you do not know, the unicorn is the official animal of Scotland. I love a country that shares my priorities. So the story is told from Margaret's perspective. She's a little girl whose parents have just moved to the Highlands to be near to her grandmother. She's left everything and everyone she knows, and now she's in a very isolated place. One day she sees a whole flock of unicorns disappearing into the sky through the fog. And somebody has gotten left behind. A baby unicorn got stuck in some weeds. So she takes the baby unicorn home and her grandmother says, oh, I didn't think there were any left. So this all leads to the new venture of taking care of the baby unicorn, who apparently needs to feast on beautiful fresh flowers, and he needs to drink water that has been touched by moonlight so that his horn glows like it's supposed to. The herd isn't coming back till next spring, so Margaret gets to enjoy her unicorn friend all throughout the fall and winter. Personally, I'm super into the snow unicorn. Eventually, spring returns, and with it, the unicorns, and they have to say their goodbyes. Fortunately, Margaret is able to make some new friends, but her unicorn friend does make sure to come back and see her one more time before he leaves for the fall. And look, he's grown up so much. Transitions aren't just hard for kids. Moving is rough. Psychology tells us that moving is on the list of the most stressful things we do in life. Moving brings a kind of grief and anxiety perhaps about what's coming next. As somebody who just moved a few months ago and is going to have to do it again in the next couple of months, right now, I really relate to this book. And especially if you're moving to a place where you're more isolated than you were before, I relate to that too. Sometimes we just need to find a little magic in our new surroundings in order for it to start to become home. Or maybe we need to find something that helps us feel cozy or playful. And sometimes taking care of someone or something helps us get out of our heads and connect to someone beyond ourselves again, even as they might be new to us. Meanwhile, don't you just love that adorable dappled gray baby unicorn? Can I have one? I mean, you say unicorns don't exist, but I say the picture is always bigger. Saint Young Men, Volume 1 in this case, by Hikaru Nakamura. So the Buddha and Jesus take a gap year in contemporary Tokyo? I'm in. As somebody who is endlessly fascinated with global religions, how could I say no to that? This is my perfect manga. In case you don't know what manga is, outside of Japan, it typically means graphic novels in serial form originally created in Japan. Within Japan itself, it can refer to any act of or publication of cartooning. While Western created graphic novels are becoming more and more popular every year, manga has been extraordinarily popular in Japan for a long time and is widely read within all corners of Japanese society. Part of the reason for that is that there are endless genres of manga, from the humorous to the fantastical to the down-to-earth slice of life variety. Japanese manga has had a decently growing niche following for a very long time in the US, but now has become more and more mainstream. Almost every time I walk into a bookstore lately, they have expanded their manga section. My boyfriend is a massive fan, and this one has been on his shelf for a while, and I stole it for this video. Don't worry, I'll give it back eventually. Promise. And again, if you're new to manga, like I am, one thing that you should know is that for people who read books in English, it reads from what we usually think of as the back cover to the front cover. Because manga are originally published in Japanese and only translated into English, they have to be done this way, otherwise the illustration and flow and layout all get messed up. Being Jewish, I learned to read Hebrew as a young adult, so I'm used to reading, for English speakers, backwards. However, what's interesting for me, I'm not used to reading a book in English backwards. So the flow of the page even flows backwards, yet I'm still reading English. If you have trouble adjusting at first, don't worry about it. Take it slow. Enjoy the ride. It's worth it. In this case, if you like religious humor, you are going to love Saint Young Men. So Jesus talks Buddha into taking a year-long vacation. They have to navigate trains and food and paying rent and all sorts of things that humans have to navigate every day. Buddha of the two is the hothead, and Jesus is the more retiring, less confrontational one. That alone was worth a good laugh. And what you'll find in manga is things happen in episodes, usually called chapters. But in a comedy like this, it almost reads like an episode of a sitcom. So far, my personal favorite episodes are their trip to what is absolutely Tokyo Disneyland. They never call it that, and they're different animal ears, but it's definitely Disneyland. Jesus explains to the Buddha that the first time he rode a roller coaster, some angels freaked out because they thought he was in real danger and came to rescue him. I'm totally okay. I'm fine. And as they hit the end of their day, Buddha somehow stumbles back into his enlightenment. You will find in this series he kind of stumbles back and forth into and out of it all the time. And when he does that, he starts glowing, and that's not particularly noticeable during the day, but at night he accidentally becomes the second parade. But Jesus is able to save him, as it were. My other favorite is the Christmas episode. So as the manga points out, even though only 1% of the Japanese population is Christian, Christmas has become an incredibly popular secular holiday there. And the delicacy of choice to eat on Christmas is, and I kid you not, KFC. One of my favorite things about this particular episode is that the holiday is so unrecognizable as Jesus' birthday that Jesus himself doesn't get that that's what the holiday is supposed to be. In heaven, every year he knows when his birthday is, and he always picks up on the surprise party plans. Every time they try to surprise him, he finds out. So Buddha is determined to give him a surprise birthday party, at least for the two of them at home. He tries to keep Jesus away from any religious trappings of the holiday, and almost fails because a missionary comes up and asks them about him. He figures that if Jesus never sees a nativity scene or anything, he'll just keep forgetting that it's his birthday. He's pretty much succeeded when they get home from their Christmas shopping and they see that suddenly their apartment is full of light. It turns out an angelic host came down to surprise him too. But by the time they get home, the landlady has kicked out the foreigners, as she calls them, and said, "I told you no wild parties." I also love that his birthday cake says, "Happy birthday, Yoshia-kun." And then the landlady, while still grumpy, does at least somewhat good-naturedly ask him, "How old are you today anyway?" Buddha says, "Tell her something she'll believe." And Jesus says, well, actually this year I'm turning 24. And it says, "And all the angels watching from heaven above said unto themselves," that's a bit of a stretch. It's buddy comedy. It's two fishes out of water together trying to figure it out, coming from very different directions. It's a couple of guys buying presents for their mom back home. Apparently Mary really likes travel novelty t-shirts. And I can tell you again, as someone almost entirely new to reading manga, this is not a bad place to start if you happen to like religious humor. Or if you just happen to like reading humor in general. Don't let the different format intimidate you. Don't let a little bit of a learning curve throw you off something that's super fun. Get in there and try it out. You're really going to want to find new stuff this way. I know I am. I'm going to try some other manga soon. Not sure what yet. Honestly, I might just continue with Saint Young Men. I'm enjoying it so much. There are only another 19 volumes left. And guys, this is not a very big manga. Some of them go for several thousand chapters. There's even one manga that's run since 1968. If you're a fan of comedy manga, if you're a fan of global religion, definitely check it out. And if you're new to manga entirely, enlighten yourself. The picture is always bigger.